Every day, something dramatic happens in the Caribbean that affects our lives. We'll give you the details. We'll give you the facts on Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick. Here's Eddie Frederick.
So glad you can join us. Much optimism for growth in the tourism sector in St. Kitts and Nevis. This story takes the lead in today's edition of Caribbean Perspective for Monday, 14th November 2022. Details when we return.
Is now upon us, so we as Caribbean people need to remember to think safety and be prepared. Avoid venturing outside during a storm or hurricane, especially if there are strong winds. Rooftops and other debris are often blown about and can cause great damage.
Welcome back. Tourism officials in St. Kitts and Nevis optimistic about growth, but international forecasters are wary because of a pending recession on the horizon. Andre Huey of SKN Newsline reports.
As the tourism season commences in St. Kitts and Nevis, there is much optimism expressed by the country's leadership that tourism will improve the Federation's economic outlook. But that optimism is tempered by the IMF that expects a pending recession to have knock-on effects on tourism's progress. Just recently, Marsha Henderson, Tourism Minister, spoke to the bright future for tourism post-COVID.
This past August, the Federation lifted its travel requirements and now welcomes all travelers regardless of vaccination status and will no longer require negative COVID-19 tests prior to arrival. All hotels on the islands are now open as well. Experiential tours and offerings are now operating at full capacity. Airlift from the US, Canada, and UK will resume from the 2022-2023 season. These travel updates will not only encourage travelers to consider St. Kitts and Nevis for their next trip, but ensure it is top of mind.
Those sentiments were echoed by Prime Minister Dr. Terence Drew during a recent interview on Freedom FM.
Yes, but I want to thank General Marsha Henderson, who has been working tirelessly hard to get the cruise tourism back and to get the hotel tourism, the overstays and so forth, back to where it's supposed to be. And so we will see some improvement in that, especially the cruise. We'll see a lot of improvement in that. With the overstays we might have, it might be lower than we would have had we not kept the country locked down, even when the scientific evidence suggested that we could have opened up.
But at a recent IMF press conference, head of the Western Hemisphere Department of the IMF, Elan Golfan, says the economic outlook for tourism-dependent territories in the region have been downgraded for next year.
Tourism-dependent Caribbean economies will continue the recovery, though more slowly than anticipated in July, given weakening tourism prospects ahead. Despite slowing growth, Latin America will face high inflation for some time.
International groups like the IMF and World Bank have been quite gloomy about the global economic prospects due to slowdown of growth in China, the Ukraine war, a record high inflation in the US and other developed economies. Andre Huey, SKN Newsline.
In another item out of St. Kitts and Nevis, Prime Minister Dr. Terence Drew comes up against Dr. Timothy Harris, the former Prime Minister, on the issue of whether the economy is in deficit. Glenn Bart conducted some serious research and filed this report for SKN Newsline.
Prime Minister Dr. Terence Drew on a radio talk show said the country was in deficit, in the red, and it prompted a response from former Prime Minister Dr. Timothy Harris, whose political coalition lost in the August 2022 general elections. Prime Minister Drew said he inherited a deficit, according to information provided to him by the country's financial secretary. But Dr. Harris disputes that claim, saying he had left over $600 million in the accounts. SKN Newsline turned to data collected by the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, on the fiscal situation of St. Kitts and Nevis. To get a general picture of the finances, data was extracted for 2018 to 2022 and the IMF projections between 2022 to 2024. When the IMF data was downloaded and placed into graphical form, it is clear that there will be a year-end deficit. That is, government expenditure would have exceeded its revenue. So in this light, Prime Minister Dr. Terence Drew is correct, as one can clearly see the decline that started in early 2022 as expenditure exceeded revenue. Information and data from the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank's page on monetary and financial statistics for St. Kitts and Nevis, January to August 2022, show that information provided by the former Prime Minister is also true, in the sense that as of August, there was an accumulated cash position of $646 million at the end of August. But the data also shows that the figure is down from $715 million in January of 2022. It means that the financial resource was likely being used to finance fiscal deficits since the early part of the year. So while the country is not broke, it has been running a deficit for quite some time. What the country would not want is to run multiple deficits back to back. It means, therefore, that significant effort must be taken in 2023 to return the country to fiscal surpluses for the medium-term fiscal health of the country. SKN Newsline will continue to clarify this matter in subsequent stories. Glenn Bart reporting for SKN Newsline.
You're listening to Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick. Andre Huey of SKN Newsline reports as the ECCB embarks on a green initiative geared towards encouraging projects and investments that would help the countries of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union become more climate resilient to withstand the shocks of climate change and natural disasters.
The Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, ECCB, has embarked on a green finance initiative, which is geared toward encouraging projects and investments that help the countries of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union become more climate resilient to withstand the shocks of climate change and natural disasters. Speaking on this week's episode of ECCB Connects, project lead of the ECCB's Greening of the ECCU Financial System Initiative, Kiran St. Omer, explains how the ECCB is working to help the region confront the challenges of climate change through this initiative. St. Omer says the initiative promotes the allocation of capital to projects that have a positive ecological environmental impact, such as waste management, climate adaptation, and mitigation.
It's really the allocation of capital to projects such as climate adaptation, mitigation. I'll break this down as well. Projects that have a positive environmental impact, an ecological impact. So when we say we want to mainstream and put a framework and solutions to encourage and incentivize investments in green projects, let's look at it from both angles. The financial institutions provide funds. So we are working with governments, their related ministries. This initiative, the Green Finance Initiative, is a trilateral initiative where it's not just the financial system, but we're taking an economy-wide approach because it's the real sectors that are being impacted. We want to see green loans. When I say green, it's really the use of those proceeds going to green projects, simply put.
St. Omer also notes the importance of preparing the society for this transition. She says the ECCB is partnering with other institutions, such as the World Bank and NDC Partnership Initiative, to finance the transition and to ensure proper framework policies are in place to facilitate the participation and support of the financial sector.
How do we prepare? Can we adequately prepare for this? The intensifying impacts of climate change and natural disasters. For us at the ECCB, this means preparing our society for a just transition. And what do I mean by that? It's one where we can withstand those kinds of shocks every year. So we can rebuild, and not just rebuild, but to build a better future for our children, ensuring there are jobs for the people that are most impacted by the negative effects of climate change and natural disasters. And think about it. When we look at our energy needs, we are heavily reliant on fossil fuels. And it has been, fossil fuel in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, has been identified as one of the highest contributing costs to climate change.
And the cost of the transition is high in terms of financing that transition. We have not been able to tap into sustainable finance markets or investors to come into our region to invest because we do not have the right private investment frameworks. So the ECCB, we're championing the development of green finance frameworks in the ECCU. We're also looking at integrating climate risk stress testing into assessing the financial sector and into investment decisions by developing solutions for that and tools that the financial system entities can use. And to top it off, as I mentioned, we are looking to develop renewable energy investment solutions.
To view the full discussion, log on to ECCB's YouTube channel and Facebook page, ECCB Connects. Andre Huey, SKN Newsline.
Global economic growth, inflation, and a possible recession in the U.S. are among some of the priority items carded for discussion of the IMF and World Bank's meetings currently ongoing in Washington.
Minister of Economic Affairs, Senator the Honorable Michael Halkitis, is leading the Bahamas delegation at the high-level International Financial Conference, which literally gives the country a permanent seat at the table to discuss a myriad of financial issues impacting the Caribbean and the world alike.
You know that the main issues under discussion are climate change, the prospects for growth of the global economy, are we facing the prospects of a global recession, how inflation is impacting the economies around the world, issues related to energy security and using renewables, and how, for example, small countries can build resilience in their economies. That is, building economies that can, recover quickly from shocks such as we saw with COVID-19 and with us, the climate events such as the hurricanes.
Halkitis will also represent the country at the Commonwealth Finance Ministers meeting that coincides with this week's IMF World Bank meetings.
Our Bahamas delegation will take the opportunity to speak with banks, investors, and the other rating agencies to update them on our position, our recovery, our plans, and our policies. And so it's a good opportunity when everybody's in one place to be able to have these conversations and get feedback.
The central bank governors from across the region are meeting in the Bahamas to discuss the risks associated with climate change. More in this ZNS News item.
Central bank governors from across the region meeting here in the Bahamas for their 59th biannual meeting of CARICOM. The two-day high-level meeting bringing together those in the financial community of regulators for knowledge exchange and technical support. Central to this morning's discussion, financial sector risk and supervision in the midst of climate change. Leading the presentation, Deputy Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, Bo Lee.
Governments often need to provide financial support to repair damaged public infrastructure and assist uninsured households. This increases public debt and the risks to domestic financial institutions who hold it. These risks will only grow as climate change intensifies. Successive storms may delay economic recoveries for longer and may even deter private investment.
A mere 600 firearms recovered from the streets thus far as part of the state-sponsored gun amnesty in Trinidad and Tobago. Commissioner of Police is not satisfied.
Speaking at the weekly police media conference on Friday, he said within the last 2 weeks, there were persons in the United States charged for illegally importing firearms into Trinidad and Tobago.
We have a firearm initiative being conducted at this point in time, which is a combination of work being done by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service in conjunction with the Defense Force and other agencies. So we continuously doing the hard work in order to rid the streets and our communities of the illegal firearms.
As it pertains to the Firearm Users License Department of the TTPS, he said it is up and running and there is no intention to cease the issuance of FULs at this time. He said the department resumed operations on June 13, 2022.
During that period from then to now, we have processed about 120 FUL applications. and we have completed over 800 other processes that is required by the firearms section.
Hubbard's is once again innovating the way you shop with its new online store, providing 24-hour shopping convenience. You can shop now for appliances, hardware, houseware, building material, and more. Free delivery island-wide. Start shopping now at hubbardshardware.gd. Safe, convenient, reliable.
I am Eddie Frederick, wishing you a restful weekend. This has been Caribbean Perspective, a whole new approach to highlighting developments in the Caribbean. In the meantime, please continue to log on to CaribbeanPerspective.com for more daily news and more.